Welcome to the Think Freely podcast. Welcome to the Think Freely podcast. We are discussing AR wearables, and we are here with our esteemed guest, Fraser Bowie. And we are going to unpack the craziness of things that have happened even in the last week, but especially really the history of what's been going on with consumers, both at a basic level and also even enterprise consumers of technologies that are emerging, driving digital transformation, team members nuts all over the place with false starts and big promises and touts coming from some very big companies that have billions of dollars behind them, but aren't necessarily producing the goods. Fraser, great to have you with us here today. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I'm excited and I will speak passionately about this topic.
You sound a little bit, well, I mean, there's been recent news that you're like, oh, why are we talking about? But I don't want to steal some of your thunder. So, what makes you kind of halfway excited and trying to be excited?
Well, I mean, look, I am very excited. The last few weeks has been extremely exciting in the wearable space, right? Not just augmented reality, but mixed reality and other things. We've had announcements from Pico, from HTC Vive, from Snap, and this week with MetaConnect and their developers conference, with a bunch of their products, right? Not just a wearable AR glass, but the announcement of their Quest 3S and some enhancements to their AI on their Meta Ray-Bans. So, I mean, it's been a great few weeks in the mixed reality space. Um, and I think it's been actually what we've seen in the last few weeks reminds me of when Meta changed its name, right? When Facebook became Meta. I mean, the excitement around it. We had Magic Leap, we had HoloLens 2, Vuzix, RealWear. You had Nreal coming out with their glasses. You had Roku coming to the market and all that around that time, and there was a lot of excitement around it. And then, fast forward 3 years ago, I guess it was. We've had the success and failure and the demise of the metaverse somehow. I don't know how, but we did have the metaverse died a few times between then and now. But again, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of new things coming out, which is awesome. It's only um good for the consumer, and for the folks that are playing in this industry. It's a good time to be in this industry, even if some of it is not real or not ready for prime time. That's okay. The fact that we keep on pushing ourselves forward and keep on pushing the boundaries of the technology, I think that's awesome.
So in some respects, the consumer's getting teased, but these are all genuine attempts, maybe, at some of the technology implementations, maybe misguided pathways and so forth. But what's you were out at Connect. What was the most exciting thing that was there? Even though we know Orion was presented there from Meta with their fancy dancy new form factor and some problems solved. But talk about that and talk about Connect in general. Was that the only thing going on there, or was that how does that fit proportionally to what they were talking about with other tech as well?
Yeah, so Orion was not even Steve Jobs and one more thing. Orion was a footnote, right? I mean, there's a lot of talk about it, a lot of hype about it, but it's not a product. It is a prototype. It's not something that Meta is going to release anytime soon. It's not something that even is affordable for even enterprises, to be honest with you, at the likely cost of goods for it. So, my takeaway from Connect, probably the most important announcement was the additional enhancements through using AI for um, the Meta Ray-Bans.
Hmm.
It's I've been a fan of those
An
glasses. I
actual
have
an actual product.
an actual product that's available today that you can run out and buy. It's affordable to the point of it's $299, right? So it's $300. It's not your $5 a pair of sunglasses, but it is and it's not your 150 pair of Ray-Bans, but it is, $300. It does phenomenal things already today. The new AI stuff that they're coming out and releasing over the next few months is even greater. And that to me was the biggest announcement at Connect, right? Connect is a developers conference, so it is more tech heavy than consumer heavy, right? It's more of what can the developers do with this sort of thing. So again, I think what they were pushing with AI and what they're trying to do with AI, but also give developers access to some of the stuff to help them develop new things on it is great. And for those not familiar with the Meta Ray-Ban glasses, they don't have screens in them. They do have a camera, but they don't have screens in them. They have speakers, a camera, and some interactions that you can do on the glasses. And, you know, for what they can do to augment your reality, it's pretty awesome. I
Interesting.
mean,
Would you draw a comparison between that and what Snap's been doing with its series?
yeah, I mean, so Snap started out that way, right? So Snap is on Series 5 now. They've gone through series, yeah, 1 through 5. The first two, really, first two or three were actually consumer oriented. So they did sell them to the consumers. They were, again, similar to the Ray-Bans that Meta's released. They had cameras, they took pictures and videos, and you were able to upload them to Snap, add filters, upload them to Snapchat, that sort of thing. And then the last two iterations, they've added actually screens to them. And so, where the last one, which is maybe 3 years old, I think, the Spectacle Fours, very small field of view, but a beautiful screen actually, and they only lasted about 20 minutes, and
What about
you
the
could only do
brightness?
the brightness was fairly good inside and outside,
Hmm.
better inside than outside, right? Bright lights hurt waveguides, or the display technology that they're using, just washes them out. But they were really cool, and they were again they Spectacle Force was not a consumer product. It was again pushed towards developers. And so they handed them out to a bunch of the developers because they're trying to learn. They're trying to understand
Yeah,
how the world will use a device like this.
yeah.
And with the new ones, um, they are selling them, but again, focused on the developer, not necessarily on the consumer.
Gotcha.
Um, $99 a month, a year's subscription, so 1,200 bucks um, for them. They've doubled the size, I think, of the screen itself. They've more than doubled the time that the battery lasts. They've added, I think, a couple more cameras and more things and self-dimming, so that they work a little better outside in the brightness and things like that. So, again, where I'll give Snap credit is they're really pushing the boundaries, but also still focused on the consumer. So it's trying to see, they want to learn
Hmm.
what this could be.
Yeah.
And they're pushing it. And if every 2 or 3 years they come out with something, eventually they're going to come out with a really cool pair of glasses that work well for everyone,
And
or most
how
anyway.
would you compare the investment intensity level between Snap on that product and what really Meta has pumped into its journey? And now Orion's out, but it's trying to show progress, right, for all the money spent. But like dollar to dollar, and everybody kind of watching the podcast probably understand why I go to you for these kinds of questions because I get the skinny from Fraser all the time. And how would you summarize the comparison between the two? And by the way, follow that up with, is anybody making money off of AR glasses? CES has been presented with so many over the years, and some of them are like one eye, some of them are small field, some of them are too dim to use functionally. Some of them can't be in harsh environments in the, kind of like industrial space.
Right.
And there's so many different challenges. Is anybody penetrating, getting market share, and growing? And that's the wrap up on that thought is like, what are they doing to keep
Yeah.
making money?
Yeah. So if we look at what Snap is investing versus what Meta is investing, there's no comparison,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Meta was at one point burning about 12 billion a quarter or 12 billion a year, I think it was. I
Mm.
mean, they've invested 40, 50 million, 40, 50 billion dollars into this space. Now, that includes, the purchase of Oculus, it includes all the Quest headsets, as well as now their Orion.
Mhm.
And quite frankly, Orion is, if I look, and I will admit I'm not actually in the know of how much Orion costs to produce,
Mm.
but listening to some others that probably aren't in the know either, but are like me, understand the hardware business. A pair of Orion glasses with everything included is probably costing Meta somewhere in the $10,000 range to produce. Right. So it's not a cheap pair of glasses. That's not to say there isn't a market for that. And again, Orion is not out on the market, but on the enterprise side, cost is not an issue, right? It's return on investment's the issue. So if it costs 10 grand and it saves me $1 million, then I'm going to
Right.
spend 10 grand all day long. So cost is not necessarily an issue.
Mhm.
Um, and Orion cost that level, and we can go into that a little later, but Orion cost at that amount because of what they're really pushing,
Mhm.
right? So they're pushing the boundaries. Um, Snap is not spending $50 billion on their research to create their glasses. They are looking at what's available and building what can be, and focusing on software and other things. But there's a number of other players. There's XReal and Rokid and Virtue and all creating similar glasses. They're one group of glass. Those three companies and others are creating similar form factors, which is a pair of sunglasses using a different display model than what Orion or Snap is using. Um, and really building heads-up displays more than interactive, um, augmented reality sort of glasses.
Mhm. Mhm.
Think of them as your TV screen on your face sort of thing, and you're able to mirror your phone or other things into it, and that's what they're doing. Then you've got Vuzix and RealWear that have been focusing a lot on um, industrial and enterprise, and they've had some great success, both of them, right? Are they making money? I don't, not
Are
really,
they scaling and
but they
growing?
have learned to scale,
They have.
right? And they have learned to get adoption in certain use cases. And so they're actually doing quite well, from a perspective of penetration, market penetration. Again, they're not necessarily focused on the consumer as much, though Vuzix has come out with a few different consumer headsets over the years. The Blade kind of sat in the prosumer space, which was a monocular waveguide similar to Orion and Snap display that was color, small field of view. So, kind of think of a postage stamp sort of in it floating in front of you. Um, and it was a good device for the time. I mean, it was in fact, I think much further along than anybody else was doing at the time. And they've had a few others that they've come out, and their waveguides, which is a similar technology to what Snap is using. It's a similar technology to what is in Orion, that sort of display. Vuzix has a great display. It has a great,
Hmm.
waveguide. And they were penetrating the market somewhat, and again, have played in the consumer space a little bit. Um, and I've worked with them and used a lot of their devices, and as same as RealWear, I've worked with them and used their devices as well. And I own a lot of the X-Real and other devices as well. So really, there isn't a comparable device for each of them, but they've all kind of played. But is anyone made money in the space? And the answer is, from a wearable perspective, I would say no one is actually building a profit, but they are penetrating the market, and they are starting to get to a place where the consumers, both enterprise and your general consumer, is asking the question of what is augmented reality, or how can I use augmented reality, which is a great thing because it means we're moving forward. It's not this
But
weird sci-fi
we're
tech.
we're still far away from that moment where they're using it and they don't realize they're using it.
Yes and no. So yes, from a wearable perspective, I
Yeah,
100%. From a wearable perspective, we're
far
still
away from that.
far, far away from it. From an augmented reality perspective, if you look at companies like Lego
Mhm.
or IKEA, they were introducing augmented reality before anyone was using that term out in public,
Right.
really. And the great thing is their solutions, their implementation of it, the consumer never realized that this was technology. They were just amazed by it, right? So
That's-
Lego, and again, don't quote me on these years, but 2010, you walked into a Lego store and you picked up a box of Lego and you held it in front of the screen. It showed you what the built model looked like. That was augmenting your reality. You weren't wearing glasses. You just had to hold the thing, and there it was. IKEA, around the same time, you took their catalog and you put it down on the floor and you held up your phone or your tablet or
Yeah.
whatever was out at the time, and it showed you that chair in your living room, right?
So
And
let me ask you a question about that before we go too far away from these kind of
yes,
holographic.
sorry.
No, you're fine. Um, I'm thinking that they're talking about with Orion that they're creating these holographic, the language of holographic projection and so forth, or the holographic elements. And I think that you were having some comments about that in our lead up to the podcast today, that there was something that wasn't quite right about that terminology. And just for the listener, are you able to clarify? And for me, like I'm familiar to a degree because, and just for the audience as well, uh, I met Fraser and when he was a product owner for a company producing wearables and a variety of them and some really high visibility, like a bright, what was it, nits, 2000 nits or whatever it was. Really great experience that you were controlling for that company. And I consumed some of those and was trying to fold it into our mobile platform, our mobile app, which was centered around augmented reality. And we successfully like made our software connect, and we had this kind of experience where we could get an object to show, and a lot of times it was bringing a screen or visualization in front of you on your equipment. But it does feel like there's a kind of they've kind of gotten into the 3D representational feel of space using the lenses and the different kind of lens structure that they're using. Can you talk a little bit about that and what's unique and are they onto something? And how is that different from Legos?
Right.
I'm sure it's very different, but I'm thinking Star Wars, I'm thinking Obi-Wan Kenobi showing up. Like it's that kind of tech has been around even off planet. So
Right, right. So, I mean, if I compare what I was seeing in Lego is the same thing you see on Sunday when you're watching the NFL game, right? It's that yellow line that is showing up on the field. That yellow line's not there.
yeah,
It is being superimposed, and it's basically being superimposed there because the system knows can identify the image of the field and then say, "Hey, there's the marker, so I'm going to drop this line here," right?
it's more of a VFX thing, a video.
Yeah, and that's all
Effect.
that Lego was doing, right?
Yeah,
It had given you an image of, it had fed the computer the image of the top of the box, and so it knew that related to this object, and therefore it put it in there. And yes, when you turned the box, it turned with it, which is kind of cool. But much like when the camera moves, the yellow line stays there. That's what they were doing.
right.
So I unfortunately have not been invited to by Meta to actually put on the Orion glasses, but in the little snippets that they showed at Connect and some of the video and of both components that they were showing off as well as some of the videos that they were showing of the images that the simulated images that were coming out of the glasses, or if it was a live feed out of the glasses, what they were showing. It looks like, to me, what they're doing differently is actually creating layers of imagery. So, a hologram you think of as this virtual three-dimensional object in front of you. You can walk around it. It has some depth to it and all that. When you look at something like the technology in these wearables, some are basically a bird bath is a small TV screen that sits up here. It reflects here and then reflects back, and so you can see it in the eye. Another one, like a waveguide, there is projectors that go into this refracted sort of glass, and it shows the image, right?
There's like depth in the glass. Is that right? Like a depth of
Yeah, I
field.
mean, there is grooves in the glass to capture that light to then present this image. And
Hmm.
if you notice in some of the videos when they're talking and wearing, you'll see kind of this oil slick over the lenses.
Yeah.
And that's the waveguides. But what I thought was interesting is in the video and in Zuckerberg's talk track, he talked about multiple projectors.
Yeah.
So it does seem like there's some sort of maybe there's multiple layers of waveguides, and that's what's giving this sort of holographic feel to it versus the more flat image that you see in most of the other
And and
AR
just
glasses.
and just to put a pin in that for a second, when I do a parallel, when we were adding the augmented reality into our mobile app experience, we did not have the luxury of doing like native development
Right.
in iOS and Android, but we React Native using kind of a layer on top of that. All of those projections that we put in, even the things that were 3D, quote unquote, obviously they're just 2D, inside that space. And it looks really good. Looks like it could be 3D, but it's not really 3D. But what's in these glasses could actually be holographic in nature.
I mean, that's what the term that they kept on using, right? So, Mark Zuckerberg kept on using it. It showed up in the videos a
But
couple of times,
but
this
they're also
holographics.
saying the risk Neuralink or whatever it was. Um,
Yeah, so I have to imagine, and I mean, Zuckerberg did say that they're approaching the display like no one has done it before. So
right.
there's definitely some tech there.
Something different.
And I hope I get an invitation to go see it. Because I'm excited about it. I'm excited when somebody is doing something different, right? Um, even if it's 10 years off, the idea that you're trying to make this happen is the only way we're going to move forward. So I'm
Right.
excited about that.
Someone's
Um,
trying. Right.
right. As far as the neuro wristband thing, it's something that they've brought up at MetaConnect in the past, tied to the Quest headsets, tied to the AR glasses, and they've brought it up in the past. It's, I don't know what technology they're using today, but if the latest or last year's, I think it was last year's Apple Watch Ultra, and it has since come out. Apple has introduced what was it? Assisted. Let me look real quick.
Is that the new one that they have to pull off the shelves too? I thought there was some sort
Well,
of
yeah, they did
uh,
have to pull it off the shelves for a short
uh,
period of time, but it wasn't for that. That was for a different sensor. But
uh,
they introduced assistive touch,
mhm.
which basically meant that you could control things like you could double tap, right? Or
Yeah,
tap or double tap, and the watch would pick the movement up
yeah,
so you can control things like the camera on your phone or that sort of thing. Samsung has introduced a similar feature to their watch. There's an app out called, I think, Wow Mouse, that is out for um just general Android Wear watches, so the Pixel watches and other things like that. So the idea of wearing something on your wrist and using your hands to control things isn't necessarily new, but building an accessory specific to that would obviously give you a few more controls. If you look at the video and you look into it really, and again, not trying to say that, oh, it's just simple and others have been able to do it. I mean, there are only, like, I think, three or four gestures that Meta has
yeah,
added today into that. But the idea of that was, if we look at something like the Apple Vision Pro, it was one of the things that Apple saw other VR headsets failing at, or spatial computing devices failing at, was that, and that's why they moved the cameras to here, so that I didn't need to wear anything extra, but I could do similar sort of things, because the cameras were more natural than me doing this,
right.
and that's why they're bringing that out. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg actually even mentioned it on the on his keynote, was that the reason it came out is some people might be in public, don't want to speak to it. They don't want to be doing this, looking, a little crazy. So that's why they added this. Um, which I think is, the more input options we have, the better. Some
Yeah,
of us are going to like certain things and others are going to like other things, and that's how we're going to gain the adoption, is if we make it as natural as it can be to the people using it. And we don't, you know, some of us like to speak, some of us don't. Some of us don't mind doing we talk with our hands, so that's fine too.
right.
So I think it's great that he's adding those sort of accessories. The other thing I want to mention is, uh, and again, this is something I noticed, briefly covered, but I noticed, and to me, the exciting part about it is that it's a lesson learned. So they have a wireless puck. So to control the glasses, it isn't just the glasses, right? You have the option to control with your hand, but the other thing you do need for the glasses to work is this wireless puck. And they briefly mentioned it. And I think what I like about that is 100% about battery life and reducing heat. So the more processing you're doing on the device itself, the more battery power you need, the more heat it's going to produce.
Mhm.
So looking at, and the more battery power you need, the heavier it is, and so on and so forth. So what I like about their approach to that is they knew they couldn't power everything off the glasses and still keep them lightweight and cool and working well. Now, it does introduce other challenges, right? So if I'm pushing it wirelessly, am I doing that over Bluetooth or Wi-Fi? Am I, what am I doing it with? What's the latency? How fast is the information going back and forward? Things like that. And also, if we were, let's say this device was out today and we were to go buy that package, um, chances are, and this is just from experiences, from experience in deploying some of this stuff across enterprises around the world, chances are one of those things are not going to be charged when you want to use them.
Or one of those is not present,
Yeah,
which
yes.
that
I can't tell
drives
you
me
what.
nuts as a consumer. You give me too many parts. Oh, I just know I'm going to get three uses out of it
Yeah.
before I lose the charger that's unique. I've got 17 chargers floating around, for all these different pieces of equipment. I just
It,
so difficult.
it is, and I'll give you, the challenge that I faced, and I was doing the demos and it was my product, right? So, I was making this happen, and we actually didn't want to rely on the Wi-Fi in the building, so we're using a MiFi with a headset, um, and we were setting up the users in this room, and we were walking to another room so they could do their work and show them how it's all working.
Mm.
Every time I left the room, I got halfway down the hall and we lost Wi-Fi. Why? Because I left the MiFi sitting on the desk. So even when you know what you have to do,
Yeah.
the more parts,
It's a fragile tech. I
yeah,
I long for tools, and I am
yeah.
tired of paying for fragile tech. But let me shift that attention over to one wrap-up thought on what we were just talking about, and then I want to open a new question line.
Okay.
The wrap-up thought is I do like seeing across Samsung, Apple, and now Meta, using a standard of sorts with the risk control. I like that there's an emerging additional, let's for lack of a better word, point of control or a mouse or whatever. It's just, even though you're saying that there's a puck that comes with the Orion, is that right?
Yes.
And I totally missed that. So I might not have seen that in the video clip or whatever it was, but you're saying that there's some battery charging of that device. There's battery charging of the wrist, and there's also battery charging of the glasses, which,
Yeah.
yeah, just asynchronous charging is a problem. Like one of them goes bad, my background and familiarity with uh how locking mechanisms work, physical locking mechanisms even. But all it takes is one chamber to be holding its foothold, and the lock is locked, and it means that the
Right.
tech will not work if you have one of these pieces missing. So I'm fascinated though that some of these new emerging methods with the wrist are there. And I am also impressed with the language, where we are with AI and where we are with a language interface. Our company's been pressing forward on really honing and perfecting the AI use inside of our Gladys AI, which is a conversational AI interface, because it feels like a very fundamental layer between a human and some digital product. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what Meta's up to, because right now, Meta has to rely on like it's true that the mobile phones of whether it's an Android or whether it's iOS, let's just use those two. Meta is kind of like without a phone, right? They don't
Right.
have they don't have a compute happening, and that's definitely where compute is incredibly powerful. Connectivity is incredibly powerful. Battery improvements have all been happening all through that space. Experience has all been happening inside that mobile phone. Is Meta trying to circumvent having to work with Apple and Google in the future, or or is this a crazy mission to try to run away from the phone when they can't?
Well, I think they're trying to replace the phone, right? And I think Apple is trying to replace, in many ways, trying to replace the laptop with the Apple Vision Pro. Um, Certainly the tech that they're putting into it, and I think that's what Meta's doing with their glasses. The tech that they're putting into it is, look, you won't need your phone in the future because you'll be able to take your phone calls here. You'll be able to do this. You'll be able to do that. And so, you know, I understand it and I get it. Um, but the biggest barrier of entry for a wearable is wearing it. Hands down,
which
the
which
biggest barrier of entry.
which Meta has not hit that target partly with their form factor and their weight. Although, I mean, even Zuckerberg was saying, the prototype didn't hit the target. He still had obviously a more sleek target, and I can understand from an engineering perspective,
Yeah.
you don't try to accomplish all the goals that you are going to accomplish during prototyping. You punt on some of that stuff, and knowing that that still could be heavily improved. Um, yeah, do you
Yeah. And
could you see a scenario where the future there is no puck? It's because like I feel
well, that's the hope, right? The hope
what happens
is
next? What happens next in your mind?
the dream is you don't have a puck,
Yeah.
right? The dream is, these are 34 grams, right?
Wow. So then triple that for what they've got.
So triple that for Orion, plus add a puck, plus add something on your wrist, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm wearing an Apple Watch. I've got 34 grams and my phone's in my pocket. So no difference, right? No difference than my life today. Um, if the three things that Meta has designed with Orion replace these three things one to one, there's no difference.
But Meta could
When was the last time you bought something besides maybe a trash bag and a gallon of milk that you bought to replace something else and there was absolutely no difference?
well, my brain immediately goes to I mean some are you talking about just buying something and just buying something
Just in general, right? If you
identical but a different brand, you're just saying?
your refrigerator dies tomorrow, you go out and buy it,
Yep.
right? Are you buying the exact same thing? Or do
Taller.
you end up buying something because, wait, this actually does this better?
Oh, I mean, I usually always try to get an upgrade on tech, whatever's the latest,
Right. I
and
mean, even where, sorry, I hit my desk. Even where you go out and you buy a car, it's got extra cameras today, so that makes it safer. It's got this, it's got that.
right.
So what I'm saying, and I'm not saying Orion isn't better than the three things I have now, right?
Hmm.
First off, this corrects my vision,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So without this, I'm not reading this,
Right.
right? So they need to this, I need this to do pretty much anything else, right? I mean,
Can't take away, have to add. Right.
you have to add. And so I think that's we still don't know what the use case is. I'm a use case is for augmented reality. I'm a big believer. I want to, and maybe I'm the nerd, but I want to live in a world where I can add a digital layer to it as I walk around.
Let's pause on that for a second and take a note from our sponsor. Just kidding, we don't have a sponsor. No, I did want to ask you a question before I forget. I was going to
Yeah.
interrupt you before, but you were finishing a point. What's the possibility for Meta to basically take and skip the wristband, turn that into a watch, pack it full of compute enough to run without the puck or without, just kind of like eyewear and a watch. So that's kind of the pairing that they might be heading for. Is that plausible?
Um, sure.
But I don't
But you
I
know,
don't I don't like the watch
I mean,
technology myself personally. I don't know if
the
I've
greatest thing this thing does, the
yeah,
greatest thing this watch does for me
mm,
is tell me the time. And by the way, it doesn't do it very well.
but it does it with style. You can change the style.
You know, yes, you can, but it's the great. You know what this watch did, which is silly because I have 100 watches sitting in a container somewhere in this office. Um, it got me to wearing a watch. It got me to stop pulling out my phone for me to find out what the time is.
I don't know. I mean, we're going off on a tangent. Obviously,
Right.
I did it. But like charging a watch,
So,
people that love watches are gonna laugh at my non-interest in watches, but um I'm
but no, to
I
your
don't like all the
point,
fragileness of it. I don't like that my watch can be out of battery. I just don't like that.
yeah, I
What? I
mean,
have to water it every day? Like, really?
yeah, I mean, again, it didn't necessarily improve. It gave you new features, but it didn't necessarily improve. And so, can Meta make Orion lose the puck? Yes.
Hmm.
I mean, it probably can do it today, by losing the puck and doing the compute on the glasses. But and again, they did not talk about runtime, right? So they didn't talk about how long it lasts. We know that the Snap glasses last 45 minutes. Meta did not talk about how much Orion glasses are. Now
I
again,
thought they said like a couple hours. I don't recall.
I
I'll
I didn't
I'll
recall
put
them
the
saying how long.
I just updated it on the screen for the viewers, so we just corrected ourselves with
Yes.
in post. Um,
So, I think there are glasses out there today that do a lot of things. Hell, the Meta Ray-Bans do a lot of stuff, and all
mhm,
the computes up here. And yes, you have a phone, and yes, it does go back to the phone to do some stuff. But like, it's using an app on a phone, whether it's an Android. They didn't create a puck for it. They just used what you had to help do that. So Meta could easily do that with Orion. The reason they I think the reason the puck exists today is because they wanted to keep it under 100 grams in the glasses because they knew that was not the holy grail, but that is certainly getting closer to the holy grail, right?
mhm, mhm.
And so that was a design choice out of I've said I want this to be 100 grams and I want it to last X amount of time and I
Yeah,
don't want it to look too bulky.
yeah,
Otherwise, they could have thrown it in there. I mean, look at the HoloLens.
right.
Rest in peace.
As
Uh,
of today or yesterday?
as of the note I got was that I think it was today. Um, Microsoft announced that they're just selling through their last
Let's have a brief
inventory.
let's have a brief moment of silence.
I have one here somewhere.
We're back. So you had said something interesting a moment ago about, you know, you want to be able to have a layer on top of
Yes.
what you're looking at, and you want it to augment you. And my background, I'm an occupational therapist. I don't work in the field. I haven't worked in the field since a long time, but I'm still licensed. I still care about the cognitive mental processing. I care about frustration tolerance, mental health. There's a whole range of things that are in the psyche and the cognitive layer that I think about constantly when it comes to software, when it comes to tools and systems, um, even the aging population trying to keep up and leverage this technology inside of their activities of their daily living. And all of these things are like challenges and barriers to keeping people in their home. These are expensive problems. Alzheimer's, which I am juggling a parent right now. my mom with Alzheimer's, and we'll be doing separate podcasts on technology and how we're leveraging tech inside of Alzheimer's and managing that care. But for the point that Alzheimer's is the most expensive healthcare condition to treat in the United States, um, that is something that can be offset by using technology smartly. But even for the caregiving team that supports an Alzheimer's patient, um, the lack of using augmented reality or having systems and ways of cueing the caregiver as to what needs to happen next with this person right now at this time and space against the project list, against the care plan, against all the things that need to happen for that person. There's no reason why we cannot augment the reality for those caregivers. And I'm passionate about trying to figure out if there is a pathway through and leveraging this tech for something like that. Um, but like even just the average person walking into a town, and this is the fantasy discussion of like, oh, I wish I could see everything. I wish I could see everything on top of everything. And I go back to when did Google Glass come out? How long have customers been dealing with the promise or the false promise or the false starts, like, hey, we've got it, or we've almost got it, or we're about to have it, the solutions that are coming both on the consumer level and on the business level. Can you talk a little bit about that frustration and just kind of top level, um, if there's anything more to be said about um, kind of like that? I know we covered it in the beginning a little bit about the tease side of it, but I want to believe that the mobile platform that we've built recently in recent years, which is paused, is all centered around augmented reality, that we haven't actually lost any dang time at all. Like literally,
Yeah,
augmented reality is still trying to be figured out and constructed on a hardware side. And when I build software, we like to converge with that technology. I don't want to solve the hardware problem. I don't want to solve every other
well,
engineering piece, right? I want to merge with it.
right.
I want to assemble with it. Talk
Yeah,
about
and
that.
I think
Am I
I
smoking something?
think no, not at all. I think your platform and what you've built and that thing can be used today, you know. In fact, one of the noticeable things in the Orion announcement is they need content, right? They need content developers. They need platformers like yours. They need that sort of stuff to see what this tech can do. What can we
Iterate on
bring in?
applications over and over
Yeah,
again.
yeah,
Right, right,
and we've got to continue to do that.
right.
Um, I think what you brought up is a reason we've had a lot of these false starts, even with Google Glass, right? Google Glass, I'll chop up to the marketing manager screwed up, right? Because Google Glass, they pushed as a consumer product. One of the use cases was imagine walking into a bar and looking over and seeing somebody's face, and we'll be able to tell you who they are, right? Because, it was something like that. Again, I could be completely wrong and Google can come yell at me, but it was something to that effect. And that's when you almost immediately saw bars in the Bay Area banning Google Glass, right? Because it was this
Right.
weird invasion of piracy.
Yeah.
And, I think Google Glass was, I have one around here again somewhere, but I think Google Glass was a great simple effect, a simple design. It used very simple technology, and it could have been something else, but it kind of got shut down by the privacy issue, even though I could have grabbed my phone, taken a picture, and it would have told me who it was, right?
Mhm.
So it was a marketing problem. And I mean, I hate to say it, but I think it was a marketing problem. There was a few other things with Google Glass that didn't necessarily ergonomically work out,
Mhm.
right? The design of it with the prism up here, it was always on the right eye. So people that are blind on the right eye or have astigmatism or whatever couldn't use it. There's looking up strains the eye, looking down does not strain the eye, little things like that that were missed.
Things that matter.
Um, that could have been better. But in reality, the Google Glass was a good device for its time,
Hmm.
and one could argue kicked off this whole consumer enterprise. Let's really look at this for day to day,
Mm,
right?
mm,
Though none of us are using it day to day, we could go back and say that really kicked it off.
mm,
Um, and not like, yeah, I mean, that really kicked it off, I think.
mm,
But I I think that, and I lost a little bit of what your question was, but I think that what is happening today is with Orion and Snap Spectacles 5 and even the Apple Vision Pro is not we're out here trying to sell devices. We're out here trying to learn. So we will make this great device in the future. But I think the other thing we have to look at, there's two things we have to look at. Someone asked me the question, and you kind of said something that reminded me of this. Someone asked me the question if there were enough devices out there. Right. And when you think about it, you've got X-Ray, you've got Rokid, you've got Virtue, you've got the Quest devices, you've got the Ray-Ban, you've got the Vuzix, I mean, you've probably got on the market today somewhere in the range of 2 dozen companies making devices today that are out on the market, and many of them have more than one. So do we have 50 or 60 devices? Potentially have 50 or 60 devices today. And that's a cross between um, VR type headsets to AR type glasses.
mm, mm.
So when they asked me, do you have enough devices? Their point was like trying to sell these things. No one's buying, and there's all these devices. We don't have enough focused devices. And what I mean by that is you said Alzheimer's is hard to take care of and and what could they use in AR today? They can't use any of these devices
Yeah.
because if you look at the use cases they need, if you look at
You're talking about the
what's
caregivers
gonna
taking care of them
the caregivers or maybe even the person that is struggling with Alzheimer's and all that, we've got
early,
to
maybe
look at
early.
maybe, right? We've got to
Yeah.
look at the challenges.
Mm,
What are the challenges that are happening? I spent a lot of my time over the last few years in assisted technology and helping those that need help. How can we apply technology to help those,
right,
whether it was see or hear or whatever? What can we do?
right.
So, and what I learned there is potentially I could be selling more devices than two or three of these companies combined if I focused on one use case and built a device that was focused on that use case. Right. So
A lot of general purpose components out there.
there's a lot of everyone's trying, I feel like there's a lot of hey, we're just replacing your screen with a bigger screen. And believe me, I went down that route, right?
Yeah, right.
I was pushing the heads up display for Game Pass and this and that and the next thing long before anyone else was, right? I was talking to Microsoft, GameStop, all of them, right? And it just wasn't there yet. And so there's a lot of companies that are doing that, and that's great. Um, by the way, none of them were at PAX West, which is the largest video game conference, and they all should have been if they were just trying to make Xbox Game Pass work on a bigger screen. But
Right.
that's another podcast for another time. Um, but a lot of them are doing that, or a lot of them like the Vision Pro, the HoloLens, Magic Leap, um, even Orion in its prototype form are all trying to replace the phone that does pretty much everything, or the computer that does a little more than just
Right.
of the phone. And I think that's where they're struggling. They're struggling that from a technology perspective and the cost of building that technology.
Hmm.
They're struggling that from a We don't really know what the use case is. It just does what your phone does, but it's in your face and it's better, right? And I mean, from Meta looking for content and hoping to get people to help them build those use cases, to Apple when they announced the Vision Pro, said that in their keynote as
Mhm.
well. Um, you know, HoloLens has had some showcase of use cases, but never really grasped. That's why it's
Mhm.
no longer, right? And the same with Magic Leap has sunset the hardware business
Mhm.
um for similar reasons. And I think it was they were trying to bite off way too much. They were trying to replace something, but not really giving me that value add statement, not really enhancing my experience. You know, I
And somewhat complicating it.
and somewhat complicating it. Like, I mean, the smartphone is great. Streaming services are awesome. But, TV used to be you turned it on and you flip through the channels and you watch something. Dead simple. Today I turn it on. Wait, what came out? Wait, what channel? What came out? What streaming services is on? How do I find it? What do I
How do
do?
I
Wait, I
find
gotta
out?
log in. Let
How
me
do I
get my
find what I
phone.
was just watching? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Let
mm,
me get my phone and scan the QR code so I can log in and do this, that, and the next thing, right?
right, right,
And
right.
now these services are, so they have not improved my life
And that to
from,
me, though, real quick, I agree with you that it doesn't improve, but that to me, I blame on the competitive, non-collaborative, non-cooperative technology and media enterprises that are out there. Nobody wants to share, content or resources across boundaries, and so everybody has their own app. The whole idea that technology is spawned up in every silo that a technologist can build creates a terrible experience for the consumer. It's like just a mess, you know.
but are we going to run into the same thing with wearables, right? Everyone's going to want to build their own wearables.
I don't know because there may not be many wearables that are wearable,
If we
right?
look at, yeah, I mean, if we
I mean,
look at the cell phone business,
how many are going to build successful wearables? Like right now we don't have prolific problem. We have a lot of them out there, but they're not being sought after heavily. They're not
no, they're
spreading like
not.
wildfire.
But again, I think they're not because they're
They're
not
still,
focused on what they're trying to do,
yeah.
right?
And there's some
I
big
mean,
challenges, right? There's still big challenges that you do need a meta to solve because like who else is going to solve it?
the challenge I ran into with some of the hardware that I was building and distributing, right, was we made the decision to connect with a cable to a phone. And the reason we made that decision was exactly the same reason that Orion has their puck.
Right.
It was to reduce weight, reduce heat, and extend battery, right?
Yeah.
Have it last longer.
Yeah.
So Orion Meta went the extra step and found a way to get rid of the cable.
Yep.
We were still connecting, right? And if you look at XREAL, you look at Rokid,
Yep.
they all have these pucks now to do it, right? Because the challenge with the phone was, and I had this conversation years ago with the Glass team,
Hmm.
but the challenge with the phone was that if you're connected, yes, on Android, it can
Hmm.
see a quote unquote USB camera.
Hmm.
So it can see a camera, it can feed information, you can share data back and forward. So things like IMU data, so head movement and things like that, you can share back and forward. But the problem was is I couldn't use most of the Google services. So if I wanted it to pick up the location on the phone, but the gyroscope of the headset, it didn't work.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
wouldn't give me that access.
Interesting.
And then when you go to the iPhone at the time, it was Lightning versus USB-C. But even when Apple moved to USB-C, it was just a display. It wouldn't share data. It wouldn't do inputs. It wouldn't do any of that because they controlled it. And so Zuckerberg is 100% right for building that puck. because no one's going to play nice
There,
with him.
that's he needs the independence. He needs to
Right. He
not
needs the
be chained
independence.
down, right?
And I think he is using a version of well, I don't know what's on the puck, but I know on the Quest he used a version of Android, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it would
But
have to
even
be.
the Android, the conversation I had with the Glass team a number of years ago was, why doesn't Glass have access to all the Google services or even the open Android OS?
Mhm.
Why does it not have access to all the Google services? And they're like, yeah, it's a decision, da 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 da. And to me, right, Glass might have succeeded faster and more if it had access to all the Google services,
Now, there's no excuse for that.
because
Is
then
there
I
an
could
ex
get navigation, I could get this, I could get that, I could do so much more stuff. But
if Google knew what Google knew, right? Replicating what Ford knew, what Ford knew. How can Google Glass have been walled off from its own products? Those departments weren't talking to each other?
I
Those
don't know. I mean,
business
I had
units
a
were
conversation,
enemies?
and even Google Lens, right? So being able to recognize something and give feedback. And in the enterprise space, that's what 90% of these wearables are used for, right? Is the camera is used to provide feedback. And so Google Lens did not work at the time
Mhm.
on Google Glass. And I'm like, you're holding the whole industry up.
Yeah.
Because RealWear, by the way, RealWear is based on Android Open OS.
Yeah.
So is Vuzix. So
Yeah.
is some of the others out there, right? I mean, even right, what was it? Magic Leap 2 kind of moved to more Android.
Mm,
Magic Leap 1 wasn't, and then they realized let's move to more. So that was holding that back. And I mean, Apple doesn't give you access to anything.
right.
And so, it's that's a challenge. And when I had the conversation with I then had another conversation with Google years later about the hardware I was building and how could I integrate more with Google services and how could I integrate more with it when it was plugged into the phone. It was like, yeah, that's not a priority for us.
Right.
And I understand Apple might be doing it because they want to keep everything closed, and so they want to focus on their own hardware, and they'll eventually bring it out. And I get that,
Hmm.
right? But Android or Google has said to the world, we're not a closed system. Go use it. Go build your own phones. Go do all this. And why they won't open that up, I don't understand. Right.
That's
So
system. Yeah.
yeah, I don't understand why they won't open up that up when they've got, hundreds of manufacturers of Google devices, right? Or Android devices, I should say. So why aren't they opening it up a little more? And I think that's why, um,
Mm.
I think that's why in the prototype of Orion, it isn't tied to a phone, it's tied to a puck because they might have a little more control. I don't know. That's my
Yeah.
assumption.
100%. I think that's
Um,
totally true. Um, no, that's crazy. So let me ask you a question. I think we could probably say that we've covered quite a bit of ground today,
yeah.
and we're glad for any of the listeners that might be tuning in to hear the skinny. I will disclose now that Fraser is one of our collaborators at Honeycomb Digital. He is one of our advisors and collaborators, and there's I first started working with Fraser, like I mentioned a little bit before, when he was at another company building a product, leading the product development. And we took that tool, and it was a tethered USB-C, HDMI out, basically went out of the Androids and went out of the iPad Pro. But I had the problems. We created modifications to our system where we could scan QR codes, we could bring up training videos, so we could use your tool pretty quickly. And maybe we need to come back to that project and maybe crack that back open or find some use cases and some market penetration. Maybe there's an opportunity there because I modified our system where you could scan a QR code and it circumvented, went right to that training video. And it was, if it was inside the glasses, you were golden and you were consuming it. So someone in a retail environment or a warehouse could scan something and see the latest training video on that thing and have the wearables, handy. Maybe they're on your head, but you'd have to use an Android because I had all kinds of problems like jockeying
Yeah.
an Apple, Apple iPad Pro around. But it worked great with the Android, and that was all pretty cool. I also liked your system where you could kind of pin the view up above the eye level, and then you could kind of come down, so your eyes would be clear, and then you could look back up and watch that video. So you can continue listening to the video, the training video, but if you don't need to see it, let it be somewhere
Yeah.
else. And we were kind of just hacking our way through how that scenario would work with our software. But I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities. And I want to understand more about what Meta's with the Ray-Ban solution that's out there and how much can be done with it. I don't know that I'd love to maybe uh, do a little bit of a micro project with that and come back with a small update. Maybe we'll put something up on YouTube as a chaser video from this podcast. But I think there might be some ways of bridging that and using that camera, that it's really functioning more as a camera device, which aligns perfectly fine with our app as well.
Yeah, and I have the old one sitting here somewhere. I gotta stop buying devices. I have bought the new ones but I'm getting my prescription lens put in, so they're not here yet. But
Nice, nice.
um
Couple weeks it takes or what?
yeah, a couple weeks I should have them. But yeah, so here's what I would say with that. Back again, I hate bringing up devices that have sunset, right? We talk about Google, we talk about HoloLens, we talk about Magic Leap 2, and now I'm going to bring up Bose. So when I saw the Bose audio glasses for the first time, I was like, huh. And I started thinking about ways, how could I augment my reality just with audio?
Right?
And it was great. And unfortunately, December of last year, Bose, no one picked up on it. I played around with it a little bit, tried to make things happen. It was a little, because it didn't have a camera, it was a little more complicated, but it could have worked, right? It could have worked fairly well. And Bose has since sunset them, um,
Hmm.
which is sad, but because they were great audio. But,
Interesting.
the hope is that they integrate into things like,
Did they did they
the Meta Ray-Bans.
did they sunset them and get the license acquired by someone else like Meta? Did they lick the cookie? Did Meta come by,
No, well,
lick the cookie
that's
and
the thing
grab
I've
it?
been waiting for, right? Like
It would
I
be
was
awesome.
waiting. I mean, part of the reason, I didn't run out and buy the Meta Ray-Bans, the latest version when they first came out, because I didn't find myself using the older version all that
Hmm.
much. And then when they started adding the AI stuff, I'm like, oh, I should buy them. But I waited until Connect to order them because
You
I thought,
want
oh, maybe they'll come out with
right.
like the Bose speakers in them, or they'll do this, that, and the next thing. They haven't. But that's what I thought, was because more and more smart
Yeah,
glasses were coming out, that
right.
maybe they were going to try to get a contract with one of the big boys, and that's why they sunset them. But they haven't as of yet.
I gotcha.
Doesn't mean they won't in the
Could be
future. But,
could be in talks.
you know, so I was sad to see the Bose because I felt like they never reached their potential besides listening to music and taking phone calls.
Hmm.
But with what, and I think maybe once you've played with them a little bit and I get my glasses, maybe we do another podcast, because what Meta is doing with the Ray-Bans is fantastic.
Hmm.
When he announced back in April, and he showed his little Instagram clip of him in front of the Roosevelt Arch, and he says, "Hey Meta, what is this?" And it came back. I was blown away. I was actually giving a speech at a conference
Hmm.
for librarians, computers in libraries. So it was basically a bunch of librarians that are holding, right? They curate our history, right? Um, and I changed my slides up because I'm like, this is a moment, right? This is a moment in history that we've got to think about, because here was something that he, wearing a pair of glasses, asked them to describe something. They took a picture, they sent it out, put it through some sort of AI image recognition, and then pulled up some Wikipedia page and came back and gave me the audio.
See that to me, like, and that's pretty awesome. From an engineering perspective, not impressed. Not
No,
entirely.
it's
But from an engine,
simple, right?
it's such a simple thing, and it's a shame we don't have that because there is yeah, even like uh just geosensing where you're at and then being able to look at local landmarks, having a very simple visualization,
Right.
correlation. It's an easy job for a visual language model to solve. As basically
Yeah, and yes. And I think, and I mean, and your platform does that, right? So
not at that
that,
level, not at that level, but it could be hooked in. Yeah. We don't have
yeah,
that hooked in right
yeah.
now.
But
We have TensorFlow in there, but not for those use cases.
right. So, that sort of thing is simple technology. There's no screens. There's no, you're charging one thing, which by the way is the case, because when you put them in the case, it charges the glasses, right? So there's no like, oh, what do I do? Right? It's just a USB-C cable. Yes, there's an app on the phone and all this, but it's phenomenal what it's doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's now available today, here and now. You can go out, spend your $300 and get this feature working today,
Yeah.
right? Now, how well does it work? How many images has it captured? I don't know, right? But if it's going off of Instagram
Yeah.
and Wikipedia, there's a lot of information out there, right? So, and I really think we should definitely come back to this in the future, because with what they announced at at Meta Connect, what they announced at Meta Connect, related to the Ray-Bans and related to the AI that they're adding in, the additional AI sort of things, is phenomenal.
Mm.
Um, and it's, you know, again, it's, I think, still fairly rudimentary. It's fairly simple design, but it's the building blocks to get us to the next level.
Yeah.
And, I do think, you know, I do think that a field ops person wearing a pair of Meta Ray-Bans and walking up to an, an ONT on the side of a house and opening it up and looking at it and saying, "Hey, Meta, diagnose," and it coming back, yes,
Right.
yes, there's no reason it couldn't do that.
Right.
Especially since that database is specific to whoever's wearing it or whatever company they're working for or whatever, and it becomes just as fast, if not
Yeah.
faster, than
To,
grabbing
to
your phone, taking your picture, doing a search, doing this, that, and the next thing.
yeah.
Yes. And you can do it while you're holding two live wires
Right.
and trying to figure out where to connect it,
Right.
right?
And the key there is not to have a mismatch or a false positive connection to data that's wrong and outside your domain.
Right.
So like being able to like Honeycomb, our company is very much 25 years now managing digital assets for big companies. But the opportunity, I think, for the next 10 years is building very specific data sets that are super dense in understanding every particular on the product so that you can have those visualizations, you can have that understanding of that version of the model of that product is defunct and needs to be removed. And all of that is like
Yeah.
very intensive, well curated data. And that can be specially available, like you're saying, through a very specific eye wearable application And when someone's coming in, they're looking at it, it's not muddied up by somebody's Reddit post with
No,
a
it's
dog coming out of the device. And it's like, well, there's no dog here. There should be a dog coming out of your device. It's like, where'd you get your data? Anyway, I'm being silly, but we're kind of
but
like hitting the juiciest part of the discussion for me, because I that's where my thoughts go, and getting the data pure and right
yeah,
and crunchable and processing to be like just totally accurate and useful and helpful. And we
yeah,
need someone like Meta to solve these other bridging problems. um, but yeah, what kind of like final thoughts would you have for today? We'll do another one on a different aspect, or we'll do a deeper dive on the Ray-Bans with Meta, and maybe I'll have an application I can show and demonstrate how we might be. I don't even know how approachable and flexible those are for a use case that we could leverage. Um,
right.
but we'll look into that, and we'll post that as well.
Yeah, I
Final
mean,
final
look,
words of advice and sage thoughts on AR wearables.
so final word, Orion is not real. It is a prototype. It is cost prohibitive to become real, but it is a great bleeding edge push to what could be,
Yeah.
right? Um, but as far as wearables and AR, if we keep waiting for tomorrow,
Hmm.
we'll never get there.
Got to work on it.
So we've got to do what we've got to do to we've got to do it today. So use what we have to create some unbelievable experiences that truly change and affect the way we live, breathe, and play, right? Or live, work, and play. Because again, from the Ray-Bans to the X Reels or even simple devices like that to the Vuzix devices and everything like that. The things that we can do with them today are awesome. The things that we will be able to do with a device like Orion 10 years from now are unimaginable.
Live, work,
But we
play.
can do some really awesome stuff
10
today.
years we'll have live, work, play capabilities. Right now it's cracking open that path. Yeah. We're,
And focus on the use case, right? I say this to my clients, I say this to everyone I talk that wants to get in it and everything like that. I want to live in a world where I can walk down and when I come across the Flatiron Building in Manhattan, I say, tell me about the Flatiron Building. And
right.
it
What
come up
or
with
what
all
was
these
here
cool.
before, or what was, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
And all that. But that's me, right? That may
Mhm.
not be you. It may not be the next person, but that's what I want to be able to do. I
Right.
want to be able to, when I'm in a pissed off mood and I decide to go for a walk, I want the world around me to look miserable, right? Because I'm miserable, everything else should be miserable, right? But that's me, not you. And that's what we can do with AR, right? Like that's what we can eventually get to. I can put on a pair of glasses, walk outside, and it could be pouring rain, and I could make it look like it's beautiful and sunshiny, right?
Or if
Or
you're
I
you're
could
you're saying if you feel down, you could make it look very sublime, like
gloomy and,
gloomy. Yeah.
the trees look like they're gonna die and, all that sort of thing. We can do that, right? And partly that's what Niantic has shown off as their dream, right? But I want that dream to happen. Why? Because I don't know. That's the kind of nerd that I am. Um,
And
you
in a
know,
kind of a cognitive or whatever comment is that that's kind of what people do anyway.
yeah,
People see the world the way they see it. And
yeah,
we don't have a shared reality yet. It's you talk to one other person, in your life, and you're gonna see it differently. So
right,
I kind of love the thing that I love about AI right now, where it can meet you where you are, is not something that humans are good at yet.
right,
You talk to AI and you tell them where you are, it meets you there and talks with you within your frame of reference, within your construct. Humans have a very hard time doing that. They want to give you their construct. They want to have you see it their way. We have a lot to learn from some of the AI stuff about ourselves, I believe. And I think with this augmented reality and being able to share what we see with someone else, and there might be an easier way to communicate, very complex issues. There are easier ways right now using augmented reality to communicate. Even many years ago with the HoloLens, you know, rest in peace, all that. But like the tabletop displays, the interfaces, the engineering things that you could do to kind of communicate those kinds of shared AR experiences. Um, yeah. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to think about where we will be as a human race and whether we learn from this journey into AR and use it as an augmented assistive technology. I'm sure it's going to be used as an addictive solution for some people. People self-calm with whatever they can self-calm with. It will potentially be that. But I think it's also, like you said in this whole conversation, it's not solving real world problems yet in a graceful way, in a slam dunk way. And there's still ways to go on that.
But we can't. So, but I would say, but we can.
That's an aspirational, and we kind of want that, right? I want to see the prototypes come out each year. I kind of do, but
Yeah.
I also don't want to make sure I don't buy every single one of them. I don't want to spend as much money as you've been spending on that.
Don't get me started.
I know. Well, hey, thank you for being here with us, Fraser. You're awesome. And then I think we're going to probably pack in another podcast down the line. Or we could even hit some other topics. I know you're versatile, but thank you, good sir. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining. And everyone listening, we appreciate you tuning in. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all.
All right, take care. Thanks.